here, the best resource for dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses. That is a really good question.
Do you do a lot with apologetics to Jehovah's Witnesses?
I spend a good bit of time talking with people every chance I have. I've got a few that, we talk back and forth on a regular basis. So the last 4 or 5 years, I've logged quite a few hours talking with Jehovah's Witnesses, and even a bit more in reading and researching behind the scenes.
Okay. Well, then you'd be pretty good to answer this question then.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I would say that if you're not familiar with Tactics by Greg Kokel, that's a great place to start for dealing with any of these cults.
As a matter of fact, he just released an updated and expanded edition of Tactics. So now's as good a time as any to go pick it up.
Yep. And I would put that as my number one kind of resource for that, because it teaches you how to have conversations, even though it's not directly geared towards how to talk with Jehovah's Witnesses. It still gives you the tools you need to have those kind of conversations. Now, that would kind of be my first go-to on these kind of things. A couple other really good resources in this area are Kingdom of the Cults by Walter Martin. It has a very extensive section on Jehovah's Witnesses. Again, this is another book with a very recent update to it. So it's been updated with a lot of the theology changes over the last 10 years. And it really gives you the whole background and history, as well as some tactics in terms of how to have these kind of conversations with people. The other really great resource that gets a little more specific, I'm looking this up so that I have the right title here, is Reasoning from the Scriptures with Jehovah's Witnesses by Ron Rhodes. This is, again, another very excellent book that goes through a lot of the scriptural differences. And in dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses or any cult group, it's important to be familiar with kind of their resources. So, Jehovah's Witnesses use New World Translation as their primary translation. A lot of people haven't heard from it because it's essentially a Jehovah's Witness translation. It's made by their translators, and it's
translators.
Yeah, and we say that in quotation marks because there's definitely theological leanings that were made in the translations.
Well, I mean, they didn't actually translate from manuscripts, did they? Oh, they did.
Yeah, they did use some manuscripts, but again, their bent and theology clearly influenced where they went with it in a number of places, including outright errors.
So it wasn't like the Mormons, where Joseph Smith allegedly put his head in a hat and got the translation from the golden plates. They actually had translators looking at the manuscripts.
Right.
Okay.
They did. I believe it's been a while since I've looked at this, so I'm going to pull up some information just to be sure. Now, one of the issues was I don't know that any of the translators they had were super advanced in terms of their training on it. So let me see here.
Yeah, well, you look that up. I actually have a couple of books by Ron Rhodes. I have his Reasoning from the Scriptures with Mormons and with Catholics. So
I didn't know he had one on Catholics.
Yeah, he does. I mean, I've since softened on a lot of Catholic doctrines as of late. So, yeah, but I picked that up because there was a time when I had a lot of friends who were pretty anti-Catholic, and so I bought some books to read them too. And I've had a lot more interactions with Mormons than with any other religious groups. So I have a lot of resources on dealing with Mormons. In fact, Kingdom of the Cults is actually one of the books I have as well. Haven't read it, but I do have it on my bookshelf.
Yeah, it's a really good resource. I kind of read through it as I'm dealing with each particular group, so I haven't
Right.
read the whole thing either. Um,
Yeah, it's like A Tale of Two Cities or Anna Karenina. It's one of those books you have on your bookshelf that you don't read, but it impresses people.
yes, yes, very true. It's like super thick.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so in looking up to make sure we're giving the exact information here, the master text used in translating the Old Testament into English was um, Kittle's Babilia Haberica. I am pronouncing that awful. Um, and then let's see here. So they did go back. They used the Leningrad Codex, Cairo Codex. They did look at some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So one of the issues was there was only one really qualified scholar who had a lot of knowledge in the original languages. So it was a lot of people who didn't have the kind of knowledge background you'd hope for somebody who's translating
Right.
from those original languages to the current. So while it is a translation, it has some significant issues with it. Um, And a book like that by Ron Rhodes will go through a lot of those and cover that. For somebody who's not big on reading, you know, there's some great videos out there by Mike Winger that go into dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses and the kind of conversations to have with them. There's also a couple excellent ones by Tim Barnett. So that would definitely be something worth checking out.
Tim Barnett does videos besides the Red Pin Logic.
Yeah. These are some of his old ones from back in the day.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if you haven't checked out the Red Pin Logic videos, go check those out. He does a great job with them.
Yeah, they're excellent. Very good in terms of bringing humor in on some of these issues.
Yeah.
You had mentioned Mormons as well, and I'd like to stop on that for just a minute too. One thing that I think is really important to point out to people in dealing with any of these groups is I want to try and have people sympathize for just a moment with the experiences some of these people have had. If you talk to Mormons and ask them about some of the experiences they've had in general, especially depending on which part of the country they're in, their experience with Christians is often awful. In terms of people being very quick to dive out there and call them a cult, to attack their beliefs, attacking kind of the most easy to attack parts of the belief, polygamy,
Special underwear.
special underwear, all that stuff. And they come on in such an approach that's not very loving. That's why something like tactics is so important, because you really want to understand where somebody's coming from and some of the experiences they've had, because one of the last things you want to do is to turn them off from Christianity entirely. So even if they eventually leave the group, then they've already written off all of Christianity, which is not something you want to happen. There's actually a fantastic book that's essentially a tactics for dealing with LDS members. And that is this, Sharing the Good News with Mormons. It's edited by Sean McDowell, but it's a collection of essays that covers different approaches in dealing with people. I'm diving a lot back in right now to a lot of the research I've done into Mormonism. And I'm kind of back into it now. I have a few people I'm talking with and having some conversations right now, and really doing a deep dive with some missionaries. So, I've spent a lot of time in that area recently.
Yeah, I wonder I wonder if anyone, any Christian has, psychologist or apologist or philosopher or anyone has ever done any research into why people become Mormons, because I know at least one person who's actually a pretty smart guy who's a Mormon, and it seems like a person of reasonable intelligence should have some red flags about Mormonism, because number one, uh, we don't have access to these alleged golden plates that Joseph Smith translated from, but we do have ample evidence for the manuscripts of the Old and New Testament, and so that right there should give you a red flag that while we can't investigate the original manuscripts of the Old and New Testament, we have so many copies and early copies of those manuscripts that we can be confident to like 98, 99% confident that we have what was originally there, that it's been preserved. And any differences are not enough to affect a Christian doctrine, at any point. But with Mormonism, it's a pretty tall tale about Joseph Smith, someone who's not educated, in translation or ancient languages, who allegedly had these golden plates, put his head in a hat, which I've been given to understand was actually a common scam back then. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't done research into that, but I've heard that was a fairly common scam back then. For like soothsayers and false prophets and things. But and then this angel allegedly takes these plates into heaven so that we can't examine them, whereas we can examine the old manuscripts. And plus, there are a lot of things that Mormonism teaches that just have been historically refuted, like this whole thing about American Egyptian or whatever it is, and how like Jesus came to the Americas, after visiting the Middle East, and so it's like how can this guy is pretty smart, and yet he accepts these nonsensical claims of Mormons. I don't know. It's a little bizarre to me that someone that intelligent could be a Mormon despite all this. Oh, and the witnesses, because they have witnesses who said, "Yeah, I saw the golden plates." They're all friends and family of Joseph Smith, so they're hardly reliable witnesses. And plus, a couple of the witnesses actually recanted, their stories later on in their lives. So,
yeah, very true. And I think those are reasonable concerns to raise at the right time with any missionaries you may be speaking with, or with any Mormon friends or family you may be having a conversation with. Those are good things to ask about in a tactical kind of approach to asking about those things. And the LDS Church has the advantage of having a lot of money behind it in terms of the school they've built. And so what you find is some of the things that a lot of apologists are accused of in terms of giving these responses that really hodgepodge different things together to make a solution work. So, for example, with the fact that Native Americans can't be traced back to ancient Israelites, the accusation is that, well, we don't know which part of the Americas this was in, and that's only part of the history. That's why we don't have any archaeology for it. That's why we don't have any DNA evidence for it. Is the DNA is so far removed that this is not possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect there to be any DNA evidence of it. Just like there's no DNA evidence of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, unless you accept the Shroud of Turin as authentic. But yeah,
and I'll say this: most of the Mormons I've spoken with have come from a place of growing up in the church. So it's not a situation. I have yet to speak to anybody who said, you know what, I just met a missionary one day and they told me about this and I believed it. Everyone I have spoken with, and granted, just given the nature of missionaries, that's kind of to be expected. So again, some research into it would be great, because most missionaries are young people who've grown up in the church in some capacity and then decide to go on mission in between high school and college. So just given the nature of the sample, that's what you end up with. The ones who I've spoken with that aren't missionaries, most of them have the same background of growing up in the church as well. So I can't say for certain, but that's certainly what I've heard from personal experience. Like I said, yet to have anybody say, nope, yep, I converted to this just because of it. A lot of it is post hoc kind of reasoning in terms of.
Yeah, I have heard of some people being convinced of not convinced of the arguments or any evidence put forward, but they, because I've spoken to Mormon missionaries. I've gone to a Mormon service a couple of times. I wanted to check it out, see what it was like. And one of the things the Mormons told me is that, if you go to the service and you feel warm and like there's that burning in your bosom, well, that's God telling you that Mormonism is true. And so I wanted to go check it out. So I go to this Mormon service, and the whole service is just like fluffy about God loves you, we should love everybody. And it's like, yeah, of course you're going to leave there with warm, fuzzy feelings, because they keep talking about love the whole time. So it's like, if you're not prepared for that kind of thing, if you haven't studied logic, or you're not really prepared for how they get you, then yeah, you can think, Mormon told me I would have these warm, burning in the bosom feelings, and I do, so it must be true, so yeah, so that's that was my experience with it. It was like, okay, I see how Mormons can get unsuspecting people and get them converted to Mormonism if you're not prepared for these kinds of things. Like if you're like a businessman who never really gave any deep thought to religion or anything like that, I can see how you might be taken in.
And I'll say this, and this is actually a point of credit. It's something I think Christians could learn from drastically. I think the main reason that they have converts to the church is probably because of the behavior of their adherents. I don't think you would talk to anybody who would say, I spoke with this Mormon and they were the rudest person I've ever spoken with. If you have interactions with people in the LDS faith on a regular basis, they are some of the nicest people in terms of how they approach conversation, how they even take insults. We as Christians could learn a lot from that.
Hey, dingbat! Oh, God loves you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing we can take away from seeing their approach. Now, I have some concerns for my Mormon friends, because I'm not sure how much of that is an effort to do good works versus genuine caring for people. Now, I'm not saying all of it isn't, but that's certainly one of the concerns that I have for my Mormon friends is this something that's put on for good works, or is it genuine care for people? Because, of course, unlike the Orthodox Christian perspective, that there's a possibility of hell, which is interesting. We come back around to that topic.
Right.
But unlike that, in the LDS faith, there is no hell for believers. I've had people tell me that, the only people who could possibly end up in hell with Satan and his demons are Mormons who have become apostate. Everyone else will end up in some level of heaven, even if it takes one or two tries to get there. So the question as to why they work so hard to get converts is something that I think is relevant too.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you can try again, then I'll just hedge my bet with Christianity, because you only get one chance in Christianity, and if I'm wrong, well, I'll try again later.
Yeah, that's the exact conversation I've had before with people, because using a Pascal's wager type approach in this is a relevant point.